So today is the first part of a series called Eagle's Take. We wanted to do a series on this because obviously we have an opinion of everything, and we want to share that. And some of these are going to be, obviously we're going to talk a little bit about products, but we don't want to focus on product as much as we want to focus on methodology, architecture, and reasons why we process and go through and choose certain things. So today it's backups, or as we like to say, backups aren't as important as, look at that animation, recovery. So
yes.
this is more Eagle's take on recovery. So
right. Now, backups are great, but what we really want is to be able to recover our data, and really even calling things backup solutions is really short-sighted to me at this point. I want to call everything a recovery solution, right?
So a little bit about Eagle's design philosophy. Just talking about your partner should treat you like a partner. I think of it almost as just like having a good friend. You don't want a friend that just always tells you yes. You want a friend that tells you have food stuck in your teeth, right?
Yeah.
You want somebody that can tell you you're not doing the smartest thing right now, and maybe you should consider changing because of this and this and this.
Yeah. So, hey, Anthony, real quick, because we are such good friends with most of our customers, we forgot to introduce ourselves.
Oh, good point. Good point.
Yeah. So
I thought you were
going
to tell me I had food in my teeth.
Yeah, you do. But yeah, Patrick and Anthony from Eagle Technologies. Most of you should probably know us. We've also got Dustin on with us to help out with the chat if we need to. He's the one that actually, took care of most of these slides. He just doesn't want to talk for some reason. I'm just kidding. That was a scheduling issue, but he's going to be around to answer any questions in the chat if we can't get to them, or bring them to our attention if we need to. All right, Anthony.
Yeah. No, good job. Thanks for catching me on that. So obviously security is a big deal. We want to think about security when we do really anything. It's interesting how things have changed over the last few years, where it was all about simplify, single tool, single pane of glass, and now you're starting to see security basically force a little bit more complexity in things, or really not even so much complexity as it is just not as simple as you might want it. Now you have to go somewhere else to do something, or we split out some duties. We'll talk about some of the things that we really want to focus on in the backup space from a security standpoint. Simplicity, obviously, saying security adds some complexity, but we still want to simplify as much as possible, because in some type of oh crap moment, if things are simple, then that's going to be your friend. And some of that is even just in the way that we protect, and not getting overly complicated in how we do protection schemas. For instance, does every single workload have to have a different retention policy, or is there some way that you can simplify those buckets that you're throwing things into? And then support is obviously having quality support is critical, because obviously things don't always go the way you want them to, and that's one thing that we really value at Eagle, is the ability that we have to support things that we sell, and we're not going anywhere. We want you to come to us. We'd rather know about a problem so we can try to help you solve it.
Yeah, so it's easy for us to support these things largely because we're consuming them as well too, right? I mean, we run our business on the products that we sell because we believe in them, right? And so it's really easy for us to provide that support for our customers, because not only are we a vendor, but we're also a user of those technologies.
Yeah, and you guys can see some of the bullet points down there about evaluating new products. As much as I want to jump to the shiny toy, that's not the smart thing to do. And so we really try to look at the maturity and longevity of a product, as well as the company. And so we want to vet those things. So make sure there's not a fly-by-night company. We really focus on the relationships that we have with people in the vendor industry as well, and their credibility. So anyway, you guys can read. I don't want to take up too much time on this slide, but so as part of the series, you might have already seen some of these, but of what's coming up, but you can see we're going to talk about primary workloads next, business continuity and disaster recovery, get a bigger focus into security, and then more around cloud and SaaS and what to do with that. So
Yeah.
So 3-2-1 rule of recoverability. I'm sure everybody's heard it at some point. We really harp on this, but the idea is you have to have at least 3 copies of your data. One of those obviously is going to be the production storage. We see this tend to be in a lot of organizations, 4 copies or more. With where you can put data, it tends to almost be even more than 4 at this point. 2 of those need to be on disparate technologies and firmware. We'll see some people that we'll try to do it with replication. So like for like hardware, and try to get around that with, different firmware levels, which maybe that kind of meets the need. And what we really see with this is over the time, people have become super lenient on their interpretation of these rules. And really the goal for recoverability is to take this as a guideline to really evaluate your strategy and your architecture against, and see if you're comfortable with what you have and if it's providing this. The one is at least 1 copy needs to be off-site, and then that's really, offline and fully immutable. In the past, and I'll show this in the history of architecture, that was always done with tape. So it was all 3. It was off-site, offline, and fully immutable. But as technology has changed and architecturals have changed, now we have to make sure that we're meeting all these needs, whether they're independent of each other or all inclusive with the technology that you're utilizing for that offsite. So go ahead into the next slide. I got some fun animations. So here's the original, somewhat original way. We have the production environment. Obviously, you're writing through a backup server, writing directly to tape. That tape, if you noticed, it went really quick, but it ran over to Iron Mountain in the caves, and that satisfied the offline need. So, you had your production environment, copy 1, and then the backup server would be putting it on tape, and we need a bigger budget. Sorry, the chat is distracting. We need a bigger budget for my special effects.
Yeah, I personally love the flying tape, Mark. So
Exactly.
This is one of the things that I said, Anthony, this is what's going to make or break this presentation. It's flying tape.
Yeah.
So,
and really at this point, a lot of people would have 2 copies on tape. So from here, one thing we started introducing was a disk copy. And that disk copy really helped with performance, helped shrink backup windows, helped shrink recovery times. And it really made tape not as much of a headache. Tape was good for what it did back then, but it was a pain in the butt having to cycle tapes all the time, and then running out of a tape, and now your backup not completing because you didn't have enough free, empty tapes in the library, and it just became where it was more of a nuisance to deal with tape. And I think in the past, that was why people had such a hatred for tape and wanted to get off it at all costs.
Yeah.
But disk kind of alleviated that, but you still had that offsite copy happening where you still had to manage the library, get the tapes so that Iron Mountain could hopefully put it in their truck and not leave it on the bumper, and throw your tapes across the road, which I've heard happen. So then you see the evolution happen to more people, not just enterprises, having a DR environment. And so now you have, I should have showed it here too, but their production environment a lot of times is replicating to the DR environment. So storage replication's happening. Then you have the backup servers also replicating, getting it on disk. And so at that point, you really have 4 copies of your data, but that tape would still be sent off to Iron Mountain. And so what this image is showing is, hey, this is the point where you really could be getting rid of that extra hassle with Iron Mountain, and maybe just have the tape stay in the library, and have the tape library actually manage that rotation. That tape becomes your offline immutable copy. And there's even some automation we can do inside the tape library where it takes it out of the purview of the backup software. So it is offline, but you're not having to manage tapes anymore. And obviously we see tape a lot in people that have long retention needs because of the cost. But really it's the true air gap and immutable copy still.
Yep, and to your point, Anthony, that tape copy becomes the immutable offline copy, and we satisfy our offsite copies by moving it to to either we're doing that DR replication both on from a backup perspective and from a production, primary storage replication standpoint. So we, like you said earlier, 4-2-1 at this point.
Yeah, and doing 5 at this point,
Really,
right?
yeah,
With that
5 with the tape copy. Yeah.
So I got to remember to tell you the tape story. So I'll do it
Yes.
after this. So really, then it's evolved from here, where same DR environment most people have, but now they're throwing a cloud copy in, and then a lot of times they're still potentially doing a tape copy. And so this is where we can start splitting hairs. Is the cloud copy, does it really replace tape? A cloud copy will cost more because you're paying monthly for it. You're paying 1 to 2 cents per month. We did the math on tape just recently, and it's like less than a cent for the cartridge, for the media tape. And then you own it. It's not per month that you're paying. So again, the cost delta is drastic, and the cloud copy, it's still in somebody else's data center, and you can take it a step up and do object lock, where now it becomes immutable and it puts a clock timer on, and nobody can delete the buckets. But again, now you're kind of getting into that, what does immutable mean to me, which is really kind of the next slide that Patrick's going to get into. But before he does that, talking about recoverability, I had a meeting last week. We were talking with somebody, and they were telling us that they used to have a guy that took tapes home, and he was the offsite copy. He would put them in a briefcase. He probably handcuffed them to his wrist to feel important, and would ride the train home. So it was on the East Coast, and they finally needed to redo a restore, and the tapes were blank.
Oh my!
Because the train, all of the magnetism basically with the train would wipe the tapes. So he would wipe the tapes when he went home, wipe the tapes when he came back. They were double wiped, and there's no data. So obviously, recoverability, you got to focus on, can I recover? It's not just getting the data there and offsite. So
that's a really fun and funny story, but it is a risk, right? And we talk about immutability. To your point, what is immutability? It's been talked about with 1,000 different products. Any storage product you've talked about in the last 3 years, 2 years has had some sort of immutability play, right? We talk about being able to to really, what does immutability mean to you? And what I really like to focus on, instead of defining a word, is define what we're trying to accomplish, right? And we're trying to accomplish some mitigation of a risk, right? So there is a risk of overwriting your valid data, right? There is a risk that you take your tape home on the train and wipe it completely, right? There's a risk somebody breaks into your data center, gets physical access to your server, and thrashes them. Another risk that we always talk about bad actors, really. We think of these guys as kind of the anonymous type hacking collectives that are, based wherever, and, state sponsored bad actors. Yeah. I mean, all these things are risks, right? But we also have internal bad actors, whether that's intentional, or there's some malice or disgruntled employee that's trying to really trash your business, or maybe it's just, hey, I didn't know better. I worked in an organization one time. I had a brand new system administrator that was just new to VMware, and she blew away a data store that had our entire Exchange environment on it. I mean, oops is a risk as well too, right? I mean, there's not negligence and really just poor planning. All these things are risks when we're talking about a recoverability. So how do we mitigate those risks? What we like to talk about. Some people in the chat have already started talking about the mitigation techniques, right? A worm copy, for example, write it once, read it many times, make sure that you can always recover from that data. An offline copy, another way that we can change, we can mitigate a risk, right? If we have a tape copy, take it out, put it in a safe with that only certain people have access to. Limit the physical access to the data, right? Other things like security. We're talking about physical security. We're talking about business logic. We're talking about the ability to put things in place where it makes it more difficult to get rid of your data, to delete your data, to make it so it's not recoverable anymore, right? So if you've got approval logics in your backup infrastructure says, hey, I want to delete these jobs because they're old, or I need to reclaim space, you need to get an approval from a higher authority to do so, right? Doing things like multi-factor authentication and application-specific credentials, other ways that we try to mitigate risk from a bad actor's perspective, right? Multi-factor authentication requires some sort of physical presence to gain access, even if a credential is compromised, right? So think about those things. And then really, one of the biggest things that you can mitigate, is, through testing and auditing, right? I mean, if they wouldn't have waited until it was time to restore data and they would have tested those tapes a long time ago, we'd have known that, Mr. James Bond on the train was deleting all their data on the tapes, right? And then segregation of duties is another big thing for us, right? It used to be, hey, you got a guy that wears many hats and he's in charge of the, making sure the snapshots are working appropriately. He also does the backups, and maybe we've offloaded the those snapshots, that snapshot management to our backup infrastructure, right? That makes things easier, but it doesn't make it as secure, right? So again, how do we mitigate some of these risks? We segregate our duties. We make sure that the guy that is in charge of the snapshots isn't the same guy that can delete all our backup data, right? We want to make sure our ability to recover is secured. And we do that by mitigating risk. And that's what immutability really is all about.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're talking about like application specific credentials. That's essentially like separation of duties, but for your user account. So interesting to think about. Again, now I have a different password. I'm logging onto a system, but I know that I don't log on with my typical admin account.
Right.
So if those credentials are compromised and pulling things off domain, and just there's some stuff that we obviously can do to better help that. The approval logic is awesome as well, where not letting people live in an isolation bubble of duty. Right. And it also helps from an oops. It's not always against an actual bad actor.
Right. Yep. And it's, one of those things where, oh geez, what was I getting ready to say? What were you talking about?
I cut you off.
Yeah.
I have two things I can address. We had a couple QA before we go to the next slide. Sure. So offsite equals air gapping. Yes and no. So in the past, offsite was air gapping, because you were taking tapes and sending them offsite. Currently today, offsite isn't really air gapped, because if I'm doing storage replication, the storage target that is offsite is still online. It's still accessible. So in that sense, it would not be air gapped. A cloud copy, people would argue, is an offsite copy or an air gapped, but it really is more light air gapped. It's more credential based air gapped, because it's a different set of credentials. I, as a domain admin, don't have access to it, but I have an access key in other ways that I can still log into that bucket and wipe stuff. So you want to make sure that you're getting immutable offsite and offline. But now, in the past, it used to be all one copy that was doing that. Now you could be getting it with different copies, but you still want to make sure you're meeting all three of those. And then you were asking about, will tape affect RTO? And so yes. So obviously, tape's getting faster, but you can only move so much data. Like LTO 9, the max throughput is 400 megabytes per second. And obviously you have data that might be split across tapes, or maybe all of it coming from one tape. And there's some things you can do there to speed up, but we're not saying that we want to recover from tape, but you want layers of copies, so that you can start with recovering from snapshots first, which will be your fastest RTO. And then if that's not there, you move down to the next fastest. And then from there, you move down to the next fastest, which could be tape at some point, but it's still better than paying a ransom and then trying to work with a really slow decoder that may or may not get your data back. So
right.
The idea is layers.
Tape recovery is faster than no recovery, right? And the ability to clear your conscience of supporting state-sponsored terrorism by paying a ransom. All those things are important to me, right? And really mitigate those risks. Each layer of each layer of complexity that we put in our environment, the primary snapshots and replication and all those things, there's additional risk associated with each of them. So you have to look at each layer of your cake and say, hey, how do I mitigate the risk here, 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 and here, right? It's not a one size fits all thing. It's not a button you can press in your primary storage to make all your data, make you sleep well at night and all your data is available. So really mitigate the risk where it is as best you can is what really the message is here, right?
Yep. And so another question about, is Airgap bulletproofed against new malwares? Theoretically, yes, because if it's air gapped, nothing is going to be changing on that. It's not deletable, it's not accessible, from that standpoint.
Right, for sure. Yeah. If it's not accessible, it can't be affected. So yeah, I mean, another thing we're talking about is, I'm sorry, Anthony, I was going to hand off to you here, but really, what is the risk? What are we mitigating from a backup standpoint? Where do we need to back up? Where is our data living, right? It's everywhere, right?
And that's exactly the point here. What should I protect? Data sprawl is happening like at an alarming rate. It's no longer, I just have my data center with VMs and my physical servers, then, that I protect. My little bucket or nest egg is spread all over. And then on top of that, like development VMs, should I be protecting those? Test VMs, should I be protecting those? Physical servers, databases, should I be doing it at a database level, whether it's a SQL backup or a Postgres or Oracle, or should I be just saying, the DBAs have it, and so you start going through this list, and the idea is that if you as an admin are making the decision on what you protect and what you don't protect, there's a lot of risk that you are actually taking responsibility for. So as a backup admin or an infrastructure admin, my goal should be, we protect everything by default. And the only time I don't protect something is if I have documented from a higher up that I'm told to exclude this. And so, for instance, with our backups, we have a default catch-all for all VMs, and we can do it through tagging in other ways. But maybe you have a VMware tag that says, do not back up. And the business owner of that VM would apply that tag, and then that would go to a policy that actually doesn't get backed up. So we have to opt into an exclusion, or opt out, I guess, of being protected is a better way of saying it. So the same thing though, NAS, do you protect NAS? Well, what if the NAS product says that I have snapshots, I don't need to protect it? Well, is that enough? And the point here is, maybe it is enough for your organization, but make sure that you're not making those decisions. You're pushing upstream that we need to protect this, unless I have a CYA that tells me that we're choosing not to. ERPs and CRM are big because a lot of people are trying to offload those out of their organization, whether it's Salesforce, Dynamic 365, or some mom and pop managed ERP. We see this quite a bit where it's like, hey, I'll host your package for you in my AWS or Azure environment. But then you as a customer don't have access to actually back that data up. And it's still your data. And so these are just things to be thinking about and talking about when looking at any new project. We got to make sure that you have the ability to protect it.
Yeah, those are all great points, Anthony. Everything from, hey, as an administrator, I want to make sure that I'm covering my own butt. It's great if you have business rules in place, right? We talked about that earlier. I would highly encourage you to have discussions with your business units and say, hey, what are your retention needs, right? Maybe, when we start to talk about things like chargeback, those things change as well too, right? I mean, there's a cost to everything. And so making sure that you protect all this data, obviously there's a cost associated with that. And so if they don't want to do that, if they don't want to mitigate the risk associated with, any of these workloads, then I mean, it's going to have to be on the business, right? Because as a technology provider, you don't want that revenue generating event, right? Your point is, yeah.
anywhere data lives so that you don't have to get your resume updated.
Yeah.
So there's some chat happening about Airgap. And so it looks like everybody can see this, but just to kind of read it out loud or summarize it, the idea is that, hey, is it really air gapped if it's just a network severing or something happening? It's basically network magic. And I would say no. We have there's a vendor that's 4-letter name vendor that goes around talking about this amazing thing where they replicate into this bubble and then they sever the network. And then, but if you ask them, well, how do I recover that data? And they're like, oh, well, you have to replicate it back out of that bubble. Oh, hold on. So that means there's a session that can come out.
Right.
Well, then the other thing you could do is you could actually put backup infrastructure inside that bubble and do restores. And it's like, well, then it's compromised. And so to your guys' point in the conversation, isolated networks are still going to have some type of communication. It's not just a quick sever. One thing we can do, with the tape library, the best thing to get it offline is to actually take the tapes out of the library. We can do some magic on the back end where we can take the library's software and do API calls and tell the library to actually move the tapes into a different partition where, Commvault or the backup software doesn't see them anymore. So they're kind of offline, but again, there's still ways to hack your way around that, right? But we're putting layers in. So it's a balance of physical complexity, what you want to deal with, and the risk that you'll assume to have some convenience of having a lights out data center where you don't have to actually go do things.
Right.
We have a product, Cloudian, that we utilize as an S3 target, and we can do object lock on that, where it will really lock down the buckets where they cannot be deleted, even by us. Even by you. The storage admin cannot go in and delete the buckets or the data until the timer has cleared. So there are ways to get it immutable, but still they're not air gapped again. So you kind of.
Yep. And so Khalil nails it in the chat. He says risk will always be there. That's why we talk about mitigating risk, because you cannot eliminate risk, right? You've got to always assume that something, I was in the military, so there's no risk mitigation that can keep every soldier safe, right? And so with that in mind, you got to choose your battles sometimes, and really based on your budget or based on what technology is available to you, make decisions, and hopefully those are business decisions that you have the backing of the business with, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So one of the other things that really grinds my gears, quite honestly, when we're talking about recoverability is the the data retention versus backup data retention discussion, right? If you retain more data, you're opening yourself up to risk, right? And I'm not talking about from a ransomware perspective either. It's about risk to your business as well, right? So if you retain data forever, right, you've got a legal requirement then if you have a discovery from the courts that says, hey, you've got to produce this data at this point. So, defensible deletion is a thing, right? Archiving versus backup, right? How do we best protect our data, right? If we archive data and if it's offline, right, and it's no longer in our primary storage, it's no longer in our primary environment, we've mitigated some risks there, right? We've shrunk the blast radius of a potential attack if we're archiving data off, right? Storing backup copies, it seems like the cheapest way to do it until you start doing things like putting extended retention in the cloud, right? There's a monthly cost associated with retaining data. And if we're retaining backup data and primary data to meet whatever requirement from a retention standpoint we have, we're basically doubling the cost associated with storing that data because we're storing it twice, right? So data retention you can accomplish without putting large extended retention extended retention policies in your backup environment, right? More than one ways to skin this cat. Really have a discussion with your business environment, with your business owners, and talk to them about what their retention needs are, and if backup retention is really what they mean by that. Talk to your regulators, talk to your auditors, and decide what this actually is for your team, right? So, I think the cat is out of the bag. We've said the C word a couple of times. We tried to be pretty agnostic. through this discussion, but obviously Commvault's been the choice for Eagle for a long time now, right? This is what we run our business on. We back up our data on it. We run our managed services on it, and we're a provider, to most of you guys, right? You've talked to us about Commvault once or twice, and really, going back to how we decide what we're going to sell. It's basically from a Commvault perspective it's an all-in-one tool, right? You can stick that Leatherman in your pocket, this Commvault, and protect every workload that you have, as opposed to having a toolbox full of tools that do different things. Commvault does it all, and that's why we talked about where data lives, protect it where it lives, and Commvault can do that.
So when you really quick, there's the cool thing is there's not just blind love there. Some of you guys might know this, but we are partners with other backup softwares as well. And so we have to understand those. We've sold them in certain instances. We help with renewals. And so we're always looking for things to make sure that Commvault is the right choice, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So
100%. Yeah, I'm a certified engineer in 3 different backup technologies, and Commvault's still my go-to, right? And it's because of this. It's where the data lives, we can protect it, right? Everything from your EHR system, your Epic systems, to your Kubernetes workloads, DevOps, laptops, Office 365, right? Whatever flavor of database you have, all your Office 365 apps, even if you're still on-prem Exchange, good luck with that. But we're still supporting.
Or Lotus Notes.
Yeah, Lotus Notes. Yeah, for the 2 or 3 of you out there, we still see you. We protect that as well. And again, all the hypervisors that you want, right? Where the data lives, we can protect it, and that's why we choose Commvault over over other products 99% of the time, right? To Anthony's point.
And having this all in one tool or one platform means that you simplify. Again, now you have all your retention in one place, all your jobs in one place, the testing in one place, versus having to have something different for your, AIX environment, or something different for your cloud environment or Office 365. That just adds complexity that's not needed. Versus having one tool.
Most definitely. And really, I mean, a lot of people talk about the complexity of Commvault. Well, I would say that, they've really heard that message over the last few years, and really there is a discussion to be had about old Commvault versus new Commvault, right? The new Commvault has the powerful simplicity when we're talking about restores, that easy HTML5 interface that's easy to navigate, to find what you're looking for, to decide what you're going to recover. That modern interface, and really SLA-driven backup policy. So you say, hey, you know what? I need my SLA for this workload is 1 hour. My RPO is 1 hour. So I need to be able to protect that data at every hour on the hour, or every 15 minutes. We're talking about SQL transaction logs, things like that. But basically, driving backup results using SLAs is really a great way to do things, and it makes sure that you're getting the backups that you need, and you're able to recover to where you need to recover. One of the ways that Commvault does that is their software deduplication, right? And using change block tracking and incremental forever strategies, making it easier for us to do backups more frequently, making our recovery points and our recovery times a lot less as well. So all of those things are important for us from a Commvault perspective. I want to touch base real quick on restores. I've made a little video so I didn't have to do a live demo, because those always fail. So I'm going to click on this video and talk through it a little bit. This is the Commvault Command Center. This is the new interface that you can do all your backup recovery operations from. And it really is powerful and simple, right? In order to do recovery operations, really, we just need to go and protect, or to find the machines that we want to recover. Again, we can protect any of these workloads. So I'm going to choose my VMware vCenter, choose my SharePoint server that I want to recover. And then it very easily shows us all of our recovery points, how it's configured, and all that stuff. So we're doing 4-hour SLAs on this server, meaning we've got backups every 4 hours that I can choose to recover from. Maybe I need to go back to the second and recover from 1141. I can select that, hit restore, and now we've got a lot of different options, right? guest files and folders, individual guest files and folders, get granular. VMDKs, individual VMDKs, attach those VMDKs to an existing VM, recover the whole virtual machine. And then we've got two different live instant on options, right? Live recovery is a persistent restore that instant ons a VM and makes it available for you. Live mount is an in-persistent thing. It's a great way to test, and it will automatically turn down those workloads once it's done. So I'm going to walk through this live recovery real quick. Again, we've chosen our VM. We can do an in-place or out-of-place restore of this VM, so we can both go right back to the hypervisor that's using, or we could do a cross-hypervisor restore if we needed to. Changing disk provisions upon recovery, all these things are available. We can select our transport mode. So if we have SAN transport availability, our media agents are talking directly to our storage, we can do that way. We can choose to redirect our writes to a production data store. So this is an instant on live recovery, meaning we're going to power on that VM from our backup infrastructure initially, and then we're going to redirect all our writes to our production data store as that recovery option happens. From an out-of-place restore perspective, you can change the display name of the VM, right? You can choose the specific host that you need to recover to, VM storage policy. So when that machine gets back or recovered, we're backing it up automatically. Whatever data store or resource pool that you want to send it to. And then you can change network settings, right? So if you're just testing and you want to offline the network on that, instead of reconnecting it to the VM network, you can choose to not connect it or put it in a lab environment, right? So those are different options there. And then you can also update IP address settings. Obviously, if you're doing a cross-site restore, you probably have a different IP scheme somewhere else. Maybe there's different DHCP information that you want to use. But basically, you can recover a virtual machine really simply, get notified when it's done, and really powerful simplicity from a recoverability standpoint from this guy. So here's our cloud corner. I told you, the immortal Bard always said, to cloud or not to cloud, that is the question, right? So we're going to focus a little bit on cloud here as it relates to backups. And you'll see these in our series, our cloud corners here. So, you think of cloud workloads, you presume that they're protected, right? Maybe there's some native protection involved. Maybe, there are tools inside of your service provider that does quote unquote backups, but there are gaps in those backups, right? Take Azure, for example, right? You can only back up 3 times a day. So what happens with our SLA driven backups, right? We can't back up every hour in Azure. There's no Linux support. And really, it really just leaves something to be desired, right? I mean, when we talk about a shared responsibility model, Microsoft has always said that the integrity of your data is your responsibility, and that's the same with cloud workloads. So we want to make sure that we protect those things. And it's not just about data protection either, right? I mean, we have different cloud strategies that people are employing. Maybe you've got cross-region or multi-cloud replication. You've got workloads in multiple clouds. You got different SaaS or PaaS offerings, all these things. It's your data that you need to protect, right? And really to own. In order to own some of that PaaS or SaaS data, you've got to get access to it. And so backing it up and bringing it back on-prem, all these things are important, right? And then from a cloud capability standpoint, Commvault, I'll take the Pepsi challenge with any other product as far as multi-cloud functionalities, right? Multiple hypervisors are very easy to determine what's being protected, what's not. All the same recoverability options that we talked about earlier. And again, hypervisors support everything from Alibaba down to VMware, but we do have our major cloud provider options there listed as well. And then, the good news is that, if you've got that sort of multi-cloud, focus, then and you need to move workloads around, right? We've got Amazon workloads that we want to move to GCP, perhaps. We can choose to recover cross-hypervisor, similarly to doing regular backup or recovery operations, come in and choose the full instance recovery. Obviously, you have some granular options there as well, but a full instance recovery to a different hypervisor, really pretty simple. We do an out-of-place restore. you can select the access nodes that you need to use if you'd like to, but then obviously just choose your hypervisor that you like to recover to. And then, you have then the ability to automatically select, or excuse me, to select the machine type that you want to recover into. You have the ability to choose an individual region within your GCP instance, for example. Choose a specific, a specific workload type here as well.
It is nice you can right size when you're putting it out there.
For sure, yeah.
That's one thing, obviously, when you have resources at your disposal, you give it more. When you have to pay for them and rent them, you give them less.
Yeah. And then from a storage standpoint too, we can move our data all around the place, right? So cloud storage options. Commvault has a Metallic offering, which is an API-based cloud storage solution that allows you to write your backups directly to them. But it also supports multiple cloud, all of our basic cloud storage accounts, right? Everything from Alibaba to Wasabi. Everything's, Eagle Cloud is the other important one, right? It doesn't say Eagle Cloud in that, but Eagle Cloud is supported as well. So we do have our own S3 offerings. But really, S3 buckets are not just backup targets either, right? They're also places where our data lives. So being able to protect those, protect the containers, all important stuff, right? So your cloud strategy, your cloud workloads need to be protected. You can leverage the cloud to protect your data. You can leverage the cloud to protect your PaaS and SaaS offerings, all important stuff. So make sure you're keeping in mind those cloud workloads when you're talking about recoverability as well.
Yeah, we can touch more on some of the stuff during the BCDR conversation, but again, you need to also be able to have that data portability so that what if you don't want to stay in Azure anymore, and so like Commvault has the ability to replicate buckets or blob storage from and keep it in sync from Azure to AWS S3. I mean, so there's a lot of functionality here. It's just thinking outside the box a little bit and really going through those scenarios of